Honourable Swart.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for coming forward and helping us clarify certain issues. Just from your statement, have you ever served on a board before? Have you served on a board before?
Yes, I have. I've been on about 3 boards, South African Women in Mining, BLK Insurance, and other private...
Other state-owned enterprises?
No, I have not.
And so you applied for this board without any... I mean, Eskom being the biggest SOE. What made you think that with limited understanding of board management that you would be able to add value, or that you're qualified? If you excuse me, it's quite personal, but we're trying to deal with lack of governance there and issues around the board's competences. Now, you've got a legal degree, you've served on private boards, but in this SOC that is in a mess, what made you think that you had the necessary qualifications to remedy what was going on at Eskom?
I have almost 20 years experience in legal. I've been a corporate lawyer for a fairly long time. I've sat as an executive in an executive role in corporate. So I was very confident that I had the abilities as an attorney to apply my mind in terms of being on a board, and that is why I applied for the position. I still, in hindsight, in terms of everything I did, I added tremendous value. I know that it sounds cynical coming from me, but we had, and with due respect to Dr. Pat, he was the only engineer on our board. There were certain things that Dr. Pat took for granted simply because he's been in this industry for so long and he saw it happen, like, the demand side management and things like that. But when you come from corporate and you come from legal and you have different experiences in the private sector in terms of the way business is done, because it's all about the bottom line. And then you come to an SOE and you realize the bottom line doesn't even falter. It's about survival. Even though they can afford to be so profitable. I think, that sort of knowledge, you bring it in from a different perspective. And I honestly and I confidently say the probing that I did was very valuable to Eskom, and I feel I did contribute.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your questions around the Tageto issue. You probably heard our questioning earlier around the firing of the suspension of the 4 executives that resulted in the credit downgrade of Eskom. Now, with your corporate experience, and in hindsight now, you probably heard Ms Klein saying that in hindsight now it was a clear mistake. But surely at that time, did you seriously consider the implications of the suspension of those 4 top executives and the implications that it would have, given your limited experience on a public SOE board?
We did not see that coming. I'll be honest with you. We did talk about how it will affect the financial market. That was addressed specifically by Mr. Pomensky, and you're right, it's probably because of his experience. That, it will have a negative impact, but under no way did the concept even come, or were there ever discussions on the downgrade. That was really shocking, when that ended up what it ended up having. It was just devastating to us as a board.
You see, it seems that at the time there was very little evidence against those 4 executives, and we know the Dentons, and in fact, Ms Klein indicates that there was only 2 there was evidence given against Mr Matona and the other member. There was nothing against them, yet the board agreed that they should be suspended, and it has a hugely detrimental impact on those persons' careers. Do you, in hindsight, are you sorry for what happened to those executives?
If it affected their careers, of course, absolutely. I'm not taking the blame away from the fact that I was not on P&G. I remember having the discussions with P&G, and we said to them, you've got to treat these people fairly, because we knew there was nothing within the inquiry, or there was no damning evidence against them. So it was simply unfair for us to just, the perception out in the public domain that was, there could be something wrong. And that is why when the media statement was also sent out, it was clearly made that there was no specific evidence proving any wrongdoing on anybody. So those are the things we tried to facilitate and carry forward in terms of doing the right thing.
You see, the financial director gave evidence here that it was a pushback due to certain decisions that they had taken, such as her refusing to sign the TNA breakfast contract with the Gupta-related company, and that this process was a pushback to rid certain people that were obstacles to the promotion of certain interests, Gupta-related companies. What would your response be to that?
To be honest with you, I only found out about it when I listened to her inquiry, but also when I requested the minutes from Eskom, I said to them I want from the day I arrived till the day I left. So they ironically sent me the minutes for December 2014. The month we, and if you look at and this was the first time I've read the minutes now, it was so clear on terms of what the board were deliberating, specifically with the TNA. But when the matter came to us, let me explain to you exactly what came to us on the TNA matter.
Can you do it very briefly?
Yes, we didn't receive the minutes of the previous meetings. There was no handover process. We never had a discussion with any of the board members. The only people that we had discussions was Mrs. Mabude and Mr. Tsotsi. I mean, we should have definitely had a handover, because when I read those minutes, it was clear there were lots of issues concerning this agreement. But the one thing that came before us in terms of that resolution was an opinion, not by the auditor or the accounting firm you mentioned. It was by a law firm basically setting out what was the repercussions of this agreement, specifically that Mr. Matjila had signed it with no authority, and that if we chose not to ratify it, this company could have sued us, basically for the full value of the contract as well as for legal fees. And that was the information that came to us.
You see, as a board member and as a lawyer, you're aware of the Public Finance Management Act.
Yes.
And the fact that that contract was not signed by the financial director meant that it was in breach of the Public Finance Management Act. So in reality, you should never have approved that. And in fact, disciplinary action should have been taken against Ms. Matjila. It was not done. Can you explain why that happened?
According to one of our minutes, we had spoken about it and the matter was supposed to be investigated. I've been trying to obviously to see whether it came back as an action item or whatever. And it probably was an oversight. But there was a discussion that something needs to be done on this matter.
This morning also I read the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act, and would you be in agreement with Ms. Klein's statement that the board struggled with not having all the required information at hand when submissions were presented, and it now appears that many of the submissions that were considered in my time contained misleading information or completely omitted critical information? You've already given evidence about the Tegeta contract.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the McKinsey, my submission on McKinsey.
I did read that, and so thank you for that.
But I mean, it is in the submission document. It was said over and over again it was a sole agreement.
But the problem is the responsibility lies with the board members, and so that is a challenge. Just in the last few minutes that I've got, you probably heard me referring this morning to Ms. Daniel's meeting with the head of generation, Mr. Matjila Koko, and going to meet Mr. Esa, who you say is a friend of yours. This is 2 days before the firing of those 4 executives, where he indicated that this is what's going to happen in 2 days' time. And that is in fact what happened. Now, does that not corroborate a capture version that Mr. Salim Esa, who is known to be a lieutenant of Mr. Gupta, they were basically running Eskom, or had very strong impetus as to what was going to happen at Eskom?
Under 2 minutes, including responses. Thank you.
Mr. Esa is not my friend. I just want to place that on record.
Correct, but you knew him. You said
yes, I do. I admit that.
And you went to a wedding.
Absolutely.
And you mixed in the same social circumstances.
Yes.
But isn't that a friend?
No, he's not my friend. I'm sorry.
But you mixed in the same social circumstances?
Honourable Swart, I don't want to...
But anyway, let's not get on.
Yeah.
Let's answer
and I'm not being difficult with you, because if any of this stuff is true, it's just... I'm sorry, it's horrifying to me.
I understand. I understand.
So nobody told us that. That never came forward to us. Even, for example, Ms. Daniel said she also knew about it. She had almost 2 years to let this board know about it. Nobody came forward and told us anything. Now everybody's coming and saying these things happened 2 years ago. Why didn't people come forward and talk? I mean, there were these odd emails, like what you all heard on the telecon, where people would meet us in the lift and tell us problems or tell us issues, which we tried to resolve and rectify. But none of these things happened.
You see, what we're trying to do is put the dots together, and we appreciate your evidence. But
and the same with me. I'm trying to put the...
I agree. Let's just look at this there. Mr. Ben Gubani, who's appointed as the chairman in September 2015, he served as a co-director with Mr. Esa. Mr. Mark Pomensky served on Gupta's Oak Bay company. He's a board member. You, Ms Naidoo, are a wife of Mr. Kuban Mudli and a friend and business associate of the Guptas and Mr. Esa. The other directors, Mr. Romeo Kumalo, was a co-director with Mr. Esa. Mr. Nazia Karim, who is married to a first cousin of who? Mr. Esa. Mr. Miriam Kasim, a former employee of the Gupta Sahara computers company. You understand the perception that the whole board was captured by Gupta-related companies. Would you not agree that that is a fair perception?
The one thing, my entire life in the last year is based on perception and association. Because I knew certain people, I'm perceived to have done things wrongly at Eskom, or to have been influenced or created undue influence for the benefit of others. I can assure you, and I swear under oath, I did not, irrespective of who I knew. And it doesn't mean that you know somebody, or you went to a function and they were there, or you had coffee with somebody, you would use undue influence to destroy a company that basically runs South Africa. That is the benefit for all our children. I'm sorry, as much as I know that article, and you know, after that article came out, I wrote to the minister because I wanted to take the journalist up, and the minister said we were not supposed to respond. I should have put that in my submission documents, but I can give it to Mr. Vanara. I showed it to him, where I wrote to the minister and I said to her, I needed to respond, because irrespective of what happens moving forward, we are destroyed. We would be associated with the Guptas as if we did something wrong, and we didn't. And by perception, I think it's really unfair to assume that that I'm captured. I can't speak of everybody else.
But you do, it's very strange, the links of all these members of a new board with one particular individual, which we know with other evidence is linked to the Guptas. So it's more than perception, it's a reality. But what stands for your credibility is your stance you took on the Tegeta mine. And that stands very strongly in the questions that you asked in that regard. So thank you for coming this afternoon, and I hope we haven't been too harsh on you. Thank you so much.